Greetings, my fellow radical thinkers and adventurous spirits. Whether you're a seasoned wanderer or just curious about redefining your path, this episode will ignite your soul and leave you craving your own fresh start. In episode 36, I interview Keely Stawicki, marketing and relationship coach, about her courageous decision to start life over at age 30, to embrace the exhilarating world of digital nomadism and navigating the twists and turns of a heart-wrenching breakup. Get ready to be inspired by Keely's resilience, tenacity, and life-changing lessons she's learned along the way. Welcome to episode 36 of the Radical Rhythm Podcast. Welcome to the Radical Rhythm Podcast. Today we have guest Keely Stawicki, and she has been an internet friend of mine for, Keely, how long has it been? Over a year?
I think it's been like 2 years.
I think so. I am so thrilled that we could finally both be in front of a computer at the same time. One of the things that both you and I have in common is we love to travel. And Keely has helped me in the past do some marketing, and she has just pivoted into a new exciting career, a marketing kind of concentration that we want to make sure that we talk about by the end of the program. But Keely, can you tell us, you are currently in Mexico. Where in Mexico are you and why?
Yeah, so I'm currently, as in this very moment, in Querétaro, Mexico. It's in central Mexico, but I have been living in Zihuatanejo, which is near Ixtapa in the Pacific Ocean, basically, for the last 3 years. And if you had asked me before 2020, where I was going to be, I would have never said Mexico because basically the pandemic kind of pushed me into making some bigger changes in my life. Before the pandemic, I had a vintage consignment store. I owned a commercial building in Hood River, Oregon, and I was building this big like reselling business. I had my own employee. I was 29 years old at that time, I believe. Yeah, 29. And I'd been in business for 3 years. Things were like happening. And then the pandemic came and I ended up in some financial trouble because I didn't have more than a couple months of savings. And along with that, I had a narcissistic ex that I had started a sawmilling business with in my early 20s. And I had left him a few years prior to the pandemic. And part of our agreement when I split was that he needed to pay off the debt that was still in the equipment that he was utilizing for the business. And unfortunately, that amount was in the hundreds of thousands. I think at the time of the pandemic, it was like about $400,000, something like that.
Wow.
I mean, that business had almost a little over $1 million in assets. And the relationship was so bad. I just was like, you can have literally everything. I just want to be free. Just don't leave the debt on me. But that's exactly what he did, is he decided to sell off everything. And with these large pieces of equipment, there's no title attached to them. So you can literally go and sell them on Craigslist, take the money and not pay the loans. And the loans were in my name because I always had good credit and a bunch of other things that are details that aren't necessary for this. But I ended up in a lot of financial trouble during the pandemic. And along with my business being closed and my life was falling apart and I couldn't see my friends, I didn't have any outlet for dealing with the anxiety. I was just falling apart. My health was falling apart from the stress. And And there was even a point where I kept calling my doctor for all these like rashes and like infections I was getting during the pandemic, not from COVID, but from the stress. And he was like, you need to start taking antidepressants. I was like, no, I need a radical life change. And so what I decided to do was let go of everything that I've been holding so tight to, the people, the places, the status, like the money, like literally everything. I hired a bankruptcy attorney to help me figure out what my options were, and she helped me to get things sold and to avoid bankruptcy, but I ended up being just basically back at zero. So everything I'd worked hard for during my 20s was basically like gone. Like I was just at zero. And from that place of zero, I got to redesign my life. I didn't want to rebuild my life, like rebuild what I'd already created. I wanted to create something new. And so I had been working on online marketing skills for that business. I'd even started like an online coaching course on how to resell vintage items on eBay. So I had these skills and I was like, how do I do this from anywhere? I want to go somewhere warmer. And I started looking at Airbnbs in Texas, Arizona, and Tennessee. Those are warmer states that interest me. But at that time, the prices had gone up so much on Airbnb that you could rent a double wide in the middle of the desert for $2,500 a month. And I was like, I'm not paying that. And at the time, I had a boyfriend who was Mexican because I love salsa dancing, and I met him there. And I asked him, I said, where could I go in Mexico that I would not get abducted? Because in the US, there's a lot of news and whatnot. We can call it propaganda or whatever you believe about it. But there's a lot, like we're raised in this culture of like, oh, it's really unsafe, like all these things. And uh, that's what I was worried about. And he said I could go to Ixtapa and I would be fine there because his family used vacation when they took time away from work. And so I booked an Airbnb for 30 days and I bought a one-way ticket that was first class because at the time of the pandemic, you could fly first class round trip to Mexico for $450. It was
Wow.
amazing. And so I took that flight and I stayed for a month and basically just kind of like decompressed. And I came back and I was back in Oregon for 2 weeks and I was like crying all the time. Depression hit me again. I just felt drawn to go back to Mexico. And so after 2 weeks, I booked another ticket and I went and I stayed for the entire stay of a visa there. You can stay for 6 months. And then I came back for a week and I was like, oh, I don't like this anymore. I don't like being in Oregon. So I went back. So I just kept testing it. And every time I was like, I love being in Mexico. At first, it started out for the weather and you can, stay in a really nice Airbnb for so reasonably. But then I really began to love the culture. And there was all these cultural shifts that started and these mindset shifts that started. I started to release the need to own things. In Mexico, the culture is very different. Where yes, there's a demographic of people that are chasing the American dream in Mexico too, as Mexicans. There's a lot of topic, a discussion about that. But really, the culture here is they value people and they value time and they value the experiences. It's a difference in language when you start to learn Spanish. The way they don't say spend time, they say pass time,
Mm.
pasar tiempo. And there's like even our language, it's about like the monetary value of time, and they don't have that. And so it really creates this spiritual journey to be able to just be without having to have so many things. And that's been really a lovely process that I've been through. But that's basically how I ended up here. And I stayed in Zihuatanejo for so much time because during the pandemic, it was just a safe place to be. I started to make friends. I got a dance school that I go to, and it just feels like home now. And every time I
Okay.
go back to the States, I'm just like, I don't want to be here.
So, so if we look at like what were the push factors and what were the pull factors, that's the way we do in academia, right? With
Uh-huh.
when we talk about immigration, what was pushing you was the pandemic, and the isolation. What was pushing you was the depression and the narcissistic acts. What was pushing you was brick and mortar store during the pandemic was
a lot of companies went bankrupt during that time. And what was pulling you was the sun and the culture and the spirit. And that's how I met you, was a digital nomad. And you were the first person, Keely, that I met that would match all those magazine articles that were coming out and newspaper articles that were coming out as I was reading about digital nomads. And it sounds like you were in your early 30s at this time.
Yeah. Yeah, I was like, I just turned 30 when I made the decision. It was actually, I had decided on my 30th birthday that it was time for a change. And I think that's a lot of women go through. They're like, and I know I did, because I always thought 28, 29 was the perfect age. If I could drink from the eternal spring and be the same age forever, it was to be 29 years old. So turning 30 meant I was past what I perceived to be my prime. But yeah, it was just like that day was the day I'm like, okay, I'm buying these tickets.
Right, right. Yeah, that's the exact same time I gave up all my material possessions and moved out to California and went to graduate school. Same exact year, same exact time. But you shifted countries and you've fallen in love with another country, um and now uh, you are shifting your business, still doing marketing and helping coaches do marketing, but you've shifted to a new topic or genre. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened and what moves you and motivates you now?
Yeah. Well, I think when we're entrepreneurs, our the way we make money for a lot of us follows our own story and our own passions. And so while I love marketing and I have a degree in marketing and I've built so many businesses for myself and others, I went to a marketing event in Florida last year, and it's one of those events where people like Tony Robbins speak at and stuff like that, inspirational speakers. And I had been stuck because I wasn't growing my business anymore. I was just in the space of being comfortable, but I felt like I didn't really feel excited about it anymore. And I got this download from the universe, and it was basically like, you need to build a business in the relationship coaching space. Like, you have transformed so much in your own journey through relationships that you could help so many women that are struggling in the same way. Because all of my friends always came to me for advice on relationships, and they would always ask me like things about attachment theory and masculine feminine energy and things like that. So I was already like helping people in this manner. And I just decided to shift into it and follow that intuition, as scary and illogical as it is, because my current marketing business supports all of my travels and my life here and everything like that. And in order to build something new, you have to create space in your life. So you have to let go of, the things that you're doing, because you only have so much time in a day. And so I've given up growing my marketing business and started developing this program. And if I wake up excited about it, I love talking about it. And it's really cool when I start talking to women and validate how they're feeling in relationships, to know that they're not crazy. And it's therapeutic for me as well, because when I'm talking to them, I feel like I'm talking to my younger self. Like, I'm able to go back in time and tell myself the things that I wish somebody in my life would have told me, that would have saved me so much suffering. Because every time, during the pandemic, I would have been okay if I had not still had my connection to my ex. If I would have been able to go back in time and actually file a police report for some of the fraudulent things did actually hire a lawyer and be strong through those situations. But I didn't have anybody at the time to tell me the things. And instead, I felt guilty and I felt shameful. And I just let him do what he wanted to avoid those feelings. And so I just want, yeah, through this relationship coaching, I want to be able to empower women that are independent and ambitious to be able to feel and trust themselves in relationships.
Mm-hmm. No, I hear you. In fact, I had not forgotten about this, but something that happened to me. I had an ex that I owned a business with as well. And they were an alcoholic and a narcissist. And I did the same thing. Just leave. You can have the business. Here you go. Here's everything. And yeah, 40 grand is what I lost. And they just sold the business, didn't tell me. My name was on it. I don't know how they exactly did it, other than they had an accountant that was a little, I don't know, shisty is the word. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I did the same thing, and I never filed the police report. So I bet there are plenty of women that have experienced something like that. For love, sometimes we do the craziest things that don't make the best intellectual or business sense, right?
Yeah, well, and a lot of it goes to, if we look at generational trauma and generational healing and the things that are going on, when I reflect on my own family and I hear other women's stories, we're just, our consciousness is raising. And so if we look at, like, I'm 30, I want to be 33 soon. If I look at my grandparents, my grandma got married at 18. They were married until they died. And they lived a very simple life. I'm not saying everybody's grandparents are like this, but my grandparents grew up in rural Oregon. They worked my grandpa worked for Boise Cascade Lumber Company until he was disabled. My grandma just got the pension when my grandpa died, and then worked in a nursing home helping elderly people. Like, they traveled once a year in a motorhome. Like, they lived a very simple life. And then when we look at my mom is really where the generational issues came up with self-confidence and anxious attachment style and self-worth in relationships, because there was so much turmoil in that relationship. And my dad was very much not a narcissist. My mom had more narcissistic tendencies, but my dad was very emotionally unavailable. Like, he never showed love freely. He never showed love freely. He never did physical contact. He never did anything that felt like love, except for when I was achieving. So if I was doing something for him or doing something that was impressive to him, then I would get attention and love from him. And so then I carried that. That was how I got love from my dad as a kid. Took that into relationships. So then I was overachieving, overgiving, doing all these things to try to get love in my adult relationships. So then I would end up with men that would feed off of that. And I didn't realize what was happening until I was in my mid-20s, when I started going to counseling because I was depressed. And there's this story that really shook that all up, that made me realize that, oh my God, this is my life. Something has to change. I went to Vegas with my mom because I was just burning out from working my store and running the solving business in this toxic relationship. And when I got there, I got a text from my ex-fiance, and he said, "Hey, there's bugs in the bed." And I said, "What do you mean there's bugs in the bed?" And he didn't reply all the rest of the day. So that morning he'd sent me a picture, and it was a maggot. It was like a little grubby maggot. And I was like, "Oh my God, it's a maggot. I don't know why it's in the bed. Maybe the dog's like had rolled in something gross and got in the bed. Like, I don't know, not my problem. I'm in Vegas." And then later that day, he messaged me and he said, "Oh, I found what happened. Our cabin we were living in was very primitive because we were like building this farm and all these things. And the cats had drug a squirrel up there and it had rotted out, and the maggots had dropped from the ceiling into the bed." And I was like, "Oh my God, that's gross. Like, clean it up. I'm not dealing with this. I'm in Vegas." Right. Well, when I got home, he had left all the bugs in the bed. They were all over the room. All he had done was taken the bedding off of the bed, put it on the floor so the dogs are now laying on it, and put a sheet over the mattress. So when I pulled up the sheet that was just laying over the mattress, all the bugs were in the little indentions in the mattress. And I was just like, "Oh my God, this can't be my reality." And what he said to me was the most narcissistic thing anyone could ever say is, "Oh, well, because you were gone, this is your fault. You weren't here to deal with this. And I have so many other more important things to do. And you're supposed to take care of the house because you're the woman, blah, 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 blah."
Oh my
And
goodness.
and that at that point, I was like, my life has to change. Like, I can't stay in this relationship. What is happening?
Right, right. So there are some people listening to this broadcast that are around your age, and they have dreamed about traveling more or living someplace else. In fact, I can't tell you how many people I know that say, "I can't stand this country anymore, and its politics and its divisiveness, and if so and so is elected again or this person's elected again, I'm out of here, right? And I have to admit, I am working on my dual citizenship in Italy, not because of that, but because I enjoy the European style of life. And I also enjoy the Costa Rican style of life. And I'm sure if I lived in Mexico, I would love the Mexican style of life.
Yeah.
What advice would you give somebody who is thinking about a radical change and working remotely and maybe being a what we would call a digital nomad, as you've kind of described where you're at? Although I don't think you're nomadic anymore. Would you say that you're? Are you going to stay in Mexico? I guess that's two questions.
Yeah, so I'll answer the second one first. I guess I'm not like your traditional nomad that people think of, you know, the kids in their early 20s that are bouncing around from country to country. When you are building a business and you're trying to really build something substantial, that lifestyle is so hard. Like, you have to have some stability and a place to work in order to really build and create. You can bounce around for a while, but it's really hard because some Airbnbs aren't going to have stable internet. You're going to have to like figure out where a new doctor is, where a new dentist is, where do you go for help, where do you go buy some chicken, what, like, it's exhausting to do for a long time. And most of these nomads, the ones you see on Instagram that are showing off everything, they have at least a home base because you have to. It may even be their parents' house. Like, honestly, some of them just go back to their parents' house for a couple months and then go on another trip because it is not energetically sustainable to bounce around forever. Like, it just isn't. Like, take it from someone who's done it, and I've had many friends. And yeah, the
And
second,
when you say energetically sustainable, what does that mean?
it means it's very tiring to be constantly like getting used to a new place, because these nomads, they go from Australia to New Zealand to China to whatever, or even the ones here in Mexico, they'll take a bus from Pátzcuaro to Morelia to Querétaro to Mexico City to Puebla back to Oaxaca and then down to the Yucatan and then up the coast, blah blah blah. Like, it's hot here. You have to speak a foreign language. Like, everything is exponentially more hard when you're in a different country. So it just takes a lot of energy, and you spend that energy on the movement and the getting used to and getting to know a new place. It's kind of like when you go on vacation somewhere, whether it be a theme park or to California or just driving to the Oregon coast, and then you come back and you're like, oh my gosh, I need a vacation for my vacation. I need to rest a day. It's like that. So if you're trying to work and do things that are hard in your business as an entrepreneur, it's really, you just don't have any energy left after traveling.
I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah.
And then Mexico, are you going to stay in Mexico?
Yeah, so I really love it here for many reasons. I love the culture. I have temporary residency, and I'm tomorrow I'm signing on a 6-month lease here in Querétaro. I'm still gonna have my place on the beach, but for the same price as renting, even cheaper than renting a studio apartment in Hood River, Oregon, I can rent two places, one on the beach and a really nice studio apartment here in Querétaro, so I can have the best of both worlds.
Mm. And I did, how would you say, believe it or not, our time's almost done. It's just it's
Oh, the
amazing how
advice. You
fast.
asked me the advice to someone
Yeah,
who
I was
wants.
going to ask
Okay.
you the advice, and then I have one other question for you then.
Okay, well, the advice I think is a really great question, because these are the things I wish someone would have told me when I got started in this. The first thing is you're going to have to get really good at letting go and living below your means, because while living in being in another country is cheaper, still traveling is very expensive and you're not as effective with work and that kind of stuff. So I had to personally get really good at letting go of things. Like, I had collected all these vintage items and things that I loved and had attachment to, and paying for storage in Oregon was half the price of my rent on the beach. So I just got rid of all these things and I felt so much better for that. Also, letting go of attachments to outcomes and certain people and places really helps as well. living below your means, and being able to make money on your own without an actual job. Because I meet so many nomads that are working for another company, and their job gets terminated, and they're like in another country, and they got to pay rent and like all these things. And a lot of those online jobs don't make as much money as you can if you're an entrepreneur and learn how to actually sell and market and stuff like that. And again, it takes time. So if you don't have those skills and want to get started right away, find something that pays, $15 an hour, $12 to $15 an hour, and then start working on your own side hustle or something to really be able to live even better while being in another country. Obviously, learn how to speak the language. Otherwise, you just seem like an ignorant American. I don't know if they say that about Canadians, but I've met plenty of expats that are in their 60s that have been coming to Mexico for 20 years and they don't even know a single word of Spanish. And I think it's embarrassing personally, because if you're going to live in another country, you really need to have respect for the people and really want to like be a part of the culture and live among it, rather than just trying to create a colony of your own country within another country for the sake of saving money. So learning the language really helps. And then also the world outside of the Western countries are not as scary as they say they are. Like, honestly, I have never felt unsafe in Mexico, and I have been traveling around by myself as a single young female for 3 years now. I've taken buses, I have taken combies, the little tiny buses. I have stayed in Airbnbs outside of central areas. I have not been I only went and stayed at a resort for 4 days because of a marketing trip, a marketing convention thing. Otherwise, I've been staying in Airbnbs. Right now, I'm in an Airbnb, like, I'm the only foreigner in this colony right now. Like, there's in this neighborhood, there are no other foreigners. And so I always feel safe. Yes, there are things, you have to be wise. Like, every time I hear of something bad happening, it's because somebody was out at a bar at 2 a.m., went home with someone they didn't know, went to a party that they were invited to after with someone they didn't know, like just stupid things that are like, I wouldn't even do that in my own country, let alone a foreign country. But yeah, the world is not as scary as they say it is outside of our own countries.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's excellent advice. Um, to leave us off with some wisdom, that's great advice for other folks. But I am also interested in finding out if you could pick one thing where you have grown the most from the time you decided to not go back and forth anymore, that I'm just going to stay in Mexico, I'm going to work on my business here, my friends, I'm going to learn the language, I'm not a visitor, I'm a temporary resident. What is the biggest thing that you learned that other folks could learn something from?
I would say the biggest thing I've learned in this whole journey is that if you're not going to do it now, when are you going to do it? And why are you not doing it now? Because of all the people I talk to and I share my story with, so many of them go, oh, I want to do that, but in the future. And I think we get so stuck in this mentality of permanence is success. We build something up until the time in our life where we want to make a change. And we say, oh, I have to hold on to this because it means X, Y, and Z, because it means I'm successful, because it means I'm stable, because it means I'm happy, whatever that may be. And then we don't actually do the thing that our heart is like pulling us towards, that bigger adventure. We never take that first step because we can't see past that first step. And we're like, oh, too scary. So if not now, when are you going to do it? Because tomorrow's not promised. And if you only had a year, if you only had 5 years, would you really be making the decisions that you're making now? Because a lot of times we're like, oh, I've got till I'm 80. I'll just do it in my 50s, or I'll do it in my 60s or my 70s, whatever. And I think the reason the nomads are becoming such a hot topic is because we're now living like the older expats, but we're young and we're healthy and we're strong. And we can even get married to a person in a foreign country and have this whole exotic lifestyle because we decide to do it now and we don't wait until later. So I think that's the number one thing. If you're not doing it now, really ask yourself why you're not doing it, because when you die, a really good example of this is, I know we're almost out of time, but the Queen of England, right? She's the Queen of England. She died, and she had been like the longest ruling monarch in like forever. And she did all these impressive things. Nobody talks about her anymore. So no one's going to care what you did, what you didn't do. The only thing that matters is what you're deciding to do in this very moment. Like, it doesn't matter if you have all these houses. It doesn't matter if you built all this wealth. It doesn't, none of that stuff is going to matter. The moments that you're experiencing right now is all that really matters.
Right. Well, that is absolutely beautiful. I have learned so much in this short amount of time, Keely. Thank you so much for visiting us. And I'm going to put your information underneath this recording so that folks, if they're interested in your program and working with you in leaving a narcissistic person or building a healthy relationship in the future, that they contact you. Thank you so much for being here today.
And I have a masterclass and a free 5-day challenge. So we'll put the links there for that, and you guys can check that out.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.